Well, hey, everybody, get ready for a new case on criminal motives behind the crime scene tape.
My name is Jay, and I co host this podcast with my dad. My dad and I have both worked in law enforcement, and we also specialize in security. Join us as we dive into some of these real life cases and find out what actually happens behind the scenes and what most people don't get to hear about.
It's going to be a good one, so let's jump right in. All right. Good evening, everyone. This is Criminal Motives Behind the Crime Scene Tape, and we're here for our second episode. We're going to be talking a little bit about informants, and going forward, most of our cases involve the use of informants, and this has a general idea of what it takes to develop one and get one, and what they're good for, what you trust them for, not trust them for, different things like that. To kind of give you an idea of what kind of tool that is in investigations. Um, Mainly, not to give away anything that might jeopardize a person's anonymity, but we'll talk about some of the tools that it takes to get these guys and girls signed up, used, managed, protected, the whole 9 yards. So we had originally had another case we were going to talk about, but it involved the use of informants, and I got to thinking maybe we should kind of explain what that looks like. So, in the world of investigations, I don't know the exact percentage, but there are a lot of cases that need information to solve the case. You'll see it on TV where they'll do a press conference and they'll say, if there's anything anybody can relate regarding the case, anybody has any information, call Crime Stoppers, tips lines, this, that, the other thing. And informants go a little bit further than that. And we'll talk a little bit about the different types of sources. And sources is just a short version of sources of information and where it comes from. But everybody knows informants, they know snitches, they know criminal informants, confidential informants, rats, all kinds of names are put to it. And it kind of depends on how you're using the person's information and what kind of case it is to hear what kind of description it is. Most of the time, the word rat is used by criminals who don't like other criminals telling on them. Depending on the type of people you're dealing with and the type of crimes you're dealing with, you'll hear them called all kinds of names. But there's basically two different kinds. There's a criminal informant, and then there are confidential informants. Criminals informant is somebody who is a criminal who is either trying to work their way out of a case or out of charges they have themselves or some other ill-gotten gain, so to speak, motive. A confidential informant is somebody who's not in trouble, who doesn't get in trouble, but who has information pertinent to a case and they want to remain confidential. Now, I don't know when an informant never wants to be remained confidential, but um, that's different than, say, an eyewitness to a crime. Guy runs a red light, hits another car, guy at the gas station says, "Yeah, I saw the whole thing. This guy here ran the red light." He's just an eyewitness to the offense. A
Right.
confidential informant or a criminal informant will have other information pertinent to the situation. He might say, "Yeah, that guy ran the red light because he and I, smoked a fatty about 2 minutes ago, and he was all geeked out." That's a little more on the line of an informant statute.
Yep.
Informants are unique individuals. Number one, you can never trust them. But number two, you need them. They're good to have. They're good to develop, and everybody can develop them from uniformed officers to detectives. It's usually done with detectives, but there's a lot of uniformed officers that have informants that they regularly go to get information about crimes in the city or in the county, and they will give them a little bit of information. Informants that are paid cash money for their information have to be documented. and they have to be documented, fingerprinted, photographed. And then that file is secured in a confidential informant file that only the case agent using that informant, the informant's manager, and one high ranking official within that department keeps possession of those files. So if anything happens to you, there's somebody else that knows what's going on. But realistically, nobody else knows nothing. And that file could be full of informants from people that, you know, don't talk about it. I never told anybody in my department which informants were mine and how many I had. They never told me. We never knew each other. We never knew how big the file was. Only that one upper level management person had that file, and they keep it. You know, the strange thing is, after 9/11, there was all kinds of information coming out after the fact. Well, the FBI knew this, the CIA knew that, the National Security Council people knew this, all these other people knew that, but none of them were talking to each other about it. Not to say that it didn't contribute to not being on our toes before that happened, but you can't be surprised if you're working a case and somebody within that case, that organization that you're investigating, is an informant for somebody else. And it could be a federal person, it could be a local person, it could be somebody in your own department. So it can get confusing, and it can get kind of bogged down because nobody wants their informant to get in trouble, but they want to keep using them for information. And I'm sitting here building a case against a group of people, and I'm being told I can't touch this one, or we can't touch that one, or this one won't go, this case won't happen, this all kinds of things going on that can delay a case. But on the flip side, a ton of information can be gathered to make your case go faster and get you that direction you need to go, that point where you can use the evidence that you have, and it builds the case for prosecution. So it can be unusual. There was a case many years ago in a large metropolitan city where a mob boss was running a crew, drugs, anything that would make money. Inside his crew was an undercover agent for one department. Inside that same department was a detective who was on the mob boss's payroll. And the guy inside the crew undercover is trying to make a case on the whole thing. The guy on the outside, as a detective, is trying to figure out who the undercover guy is. And on top of it all, the mob boss was a federal informant. So it just opened up a whole slew of messy circumstances. You know, how some people never seem to get caught, even though they're guilty as all get out.
Oh yeah.
So it's an interesting concept. Informants are extremely beneficial to a case. I had a patrol sergeant one time when I first started, and I'm driving the streets, third shift, midnight shift, looking for burglars, looking for all this stuff, and I'll drive and comb the streets, run through a tank and a half of gas each night. And I finally went to him and said, "Dude, I can't find nothing going on." He goes, "Man, hard work doesn't do it. All that patrolling won't solve anything. You need informants. You need people that'll tell you when something's going down so you can be there when it does. You're just wasting your time driving around." Now, technically and literally, I wasn't wasting my time, because anytime you've got people patrolling streets instead of setting up at the donut shop chilling is a good thing. So learn my lesson. Gotta have some informants. So
Yeah. If you ever notice, like units, so like joint drug units or
oh
a joint task force unit, anti-terrorism units. That's if it says unit or a task force, it's usually multiple agencies involved. So that way, everybody knows what's going on in that agency and or within that unit, and they can disseminate to either the locals or their agency back where their headquarters is or whatever. Like, hey, we're running this thing. If you happen to see this guy, don't wrap him up.
yeah,
And everybody runs informants differently, just as far as like the nitty gritty of it. But generally, it's all the same thing.
Yeah.
I know within certain organizations, like they will coordinate everything through the local police and even get support from them sometimes if they're running an informant and doing something going on downtown or something like that. Communication's huge, and especially for like the anti-terrorism stuff like that, they will come up with a task unit just so everybody's on the same page and everybody knows what's going on. And most of the big, we call them alphabet soup agencies because it's all three-letter
Hmm.
uh, agencies. They will all communicate on one system, so everybody gets access to this one system to communicate. It's the same writing style and everything like that, and just so everybody's on the same page and everybody's clear on what's going on. So, um,
Yeah,
communication's huge as far as
it
running
is.
informants, and informants
And
can be very lucrative, and they can also be very problematic. There can be
yes, they
some
can.
bad things that come from them, but also some very good information. Just depends on how
You're,
you run them.
you're exactly right. Quite a bit right. And I always wondered when I get two or three agencies that want to work together, I'm like, do you really want to work together, or you just want to know what we know?
Hmm.
It goes into my next question about that was, you know, there's a lot of officers that have trouble with informants because they can't wrap their head around. You mean I gotta pay somebody to do the right thing? Well, yeah, if you want the information, you will.
Yep.
Depending on how serious the case is, there's some serious money to be made. And there's a lot of officers that just don't understand that part. Their thought process doesn't go beyond, writing out a speeding ticket or working a car crash. They just can't. They can't understand that part of it. They don't see the big picture. They don't understand what it takes to make certain things happen in this country.
I know that's a big hesitation for state and local. Federal, just because we have Uncle Sam behind us, we're a little bit more loose with the money.
Mm.
I know certain agencies, they will even pay their informants if it's good information and it leads to a bust. They'll pay them a percentage of whatever they recover, which is insane to me. I mean, because if you get a big bust going, you can make your living right there. And
Right.
I've actually met a couple people that are professional informants. um, they're usually like they're clean, so there's clean informants or clean sources, ones that don't have like the criminal background, kind of like the confidential informant. And then
Hmm.
there's dirty sources who are there because they're in trouble or they're trying to avoid being in trouble or something like that, or buy back some time because they
Right.
messed up and they're helping out with something completely different. So,
Yeah.
yeah, clean sources, they are usually the ones that are driven by money, because not very often you'll get the ones that are just like here to do their patriotic duty. But the dirty ones there, you don't really have to float money to them because you're kind of giving them their freedom back.
Yeah. And that's those are good points about that. And I think as much money as the Fed sees, um, most states and certainly the federal forfeiture laws state that you can use that money seized after it is gone through the court system and awarded back to the agency. You can use that money for the further of crime fighting and crime prevention in those areas of trafficking or whatever. And you can use the money to pay the informants. So it's kind of nice where you can seize money to pay informants. That way you're not messing, local agencies with budgets, city budgets, county budgets, state budgets. You're not taking money out of that. Somebody's not going to get a new patrol car because we got to pay this guy some money for the stuff he gave us. No, it's good that they have laws that are good about that and let you use the seized money after period of time that it's cleared through the courts and awarded back to the city lawfully. Um, so some officers have those kinds of struggles trying to figure out what it is. There's other things that they have to struggle with, like giving up your case. You stumble into a good case where you want to get this guy and you got him dead to rights, but that guy is particularly essential to a larger case and you're not wanting to let it go. Maybe you're kind of on a system where case clearance is important to, keeping your job, and you worry about anybody understanding that, and you're just going to let this guy go after all the work you put into it to get it. Somebody swoops in and says, "No, we really can't do that right now. Maybe down the road we can do it, but right now we need him for something else."
Yeah.
That's a hard one to swallow. Some detectives never get over that, and they want to go back to doing something else. Um, the Fed help we kind of covered. There's consequences to that. Sometimes there's collateral damage. You're doing everything you can to protect the identity of your informant, and the feds sweep in and they don't care. If it makes their case go, your guy might get sacrificed for it. And all that work you put into it to kind of keep them quiet and useful and giving you reliable information, it doesn't happen overnight, not the big ones. And once you get a good one developed like that, you kind of hate to see that go away because of it. Plus, you know, there's another thing about that. What are the risks of the informant or of a person to become an informant?
Mhm.
If it finds out that you've been giving information to somebody in some circles, that could mean a death sentence for you, and it could mean that it's not a really popular thing.
Right.
But there are other things that go with it too. Once you're known as an informant, um, or you tie on with an agency to be an informant, now all of a sudden they know what kind of crimes you're committing
Yep.
because
Yep.
they're going to know
Right.
where you're at all the time.
Yeah.
You suffer that threat of retaliation from other people, and you see your informant. If he's not stable, he'll have some mental struggles of his own, some paranoia, worried about everybody looking at him funny. Every time somebody does look at him, oh, they're looking at me because of this, of
Yeah.
that. So, what makes a person want to inform? You know, what would make we talked one thing about the trying to get out of charges. We talked about the money angle. Um, there's some people that um, if they're just a confidential informant, they don't want to be known. They want to have to testify in court or anything like that. But they just out of pure honesty want to voluntarily cooperate. They don't have a stake in the game. They're not a criminal. They're not. They don't have any fear. But
Yeah.
you know, people like that just they just want to put it out there. They're not afraid of anything. Um, that's rare anymore because usually there's a backstory to everybody's case. You get the most popular one is one person's in trouble and they feel if they could um, give up some information, their charges might be lessened. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. It's not up to the detective to make that call. They can take the information and chase down the state prosecutor and just see if it'll work for them or what they can do for them for the information. And it depends on the value of the information. They're not gonna they're not gonna get you any time off your you know trafficking cocaine charge if you turn in a guy is a serial bicycle thief. It's
Yeah.
just not gonna.
You got to provide something of value for sure.
So we're talking about some of the paranoia, uh, some of the risks of a person who wants to become an informant. Um, a lot of times it's out of desperation. Like I said, we're going to work off some charges or try to get them reduced.
Hmm.
When they do that, that means they're going to be giving up some information that's going to be twice what it's worth compared to what they were trying to get off the charges for. So it's usually pretty good information to get them reduced. The retaliation factor comes into play when you're doing that because now you're stepping on the bigger toes in effort to save your own skin. And when you do that, somebody's going to notice. We know, um, you know, common knowledge, the Mexican cartels run, I think it's 98% of the cocaine into the United States right now. And I can't even tell you how much of the percentage is methamphetamine. It's probably way up there too.
Hmm.
You step on those guys' toes and you don't really live to tell about it. And
No.
if word ever got back that somebody is informing to get out of some charges, I've heard cases where the cartel, being ruthless like they are, will kill the whole lower level of dealers that they have just to make sure they get the right one and start all over again with new dealers. There's always somebody waiting in line to take their place. So it's a very risky business for a person who wants to decide to be an informant. But a lot of people just can't do that kind of time in jail, and they don't want to do that kind of time, and that's the only way out they have.
Yeah, usually the ones with families and stuff like that, they're going to be more likely to take the offer of working with you. And yeah, you said like the cartels, those are some of the hardest ones to get informants in. Like you either have to pay them really well or you got to promise them something like citizenship without going through the normal process and wiping all the charges away. Like you got to provide them something big because they're not just going to do it for, $100 or something like that. They could lose their life, they'll lose their family. As soon as that wind gets caught of them, even if it's just a suspicion of them ratting to the police or anything like that, it could be a bad day or their last day.
Yeah.
Um, and so those are some of the harder ones to make happen. And uh, so I was gonna bring up earlier that there's a difference between undercover officers and informants. Informants are usually, actually, always not sworn law enforcement, but
Right.
undercover officers are the ones they're the ones that go through rigorous training and making sure that they know how to keep a cover and blend in with whatever they're doing, and then they get sent in as sworn law enforcement to work um, with some of these uh, groups like mob or
Yeah.
cartel stuff like that. Again, another risky thing, but usually they have more allegiance and they're doing it for their job. So,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Right. It's just sometimes it can be overwhelming thinking about all the intangibles that go into an investigation and to solve cases and who's working for who and who's doing what for who and uh, everybody's in it for their own good. It doesn't seem to be the common good. It's just for their own good. And if it happens that something for the common good is accomplished from it, then everybody's happy. They don't see the other side of it, and it's tough. I mean, you won't see it unless you're in law enforcement, um, but it's just part of it. And when you think about the psyche of a detective who's trying to understand all this stuff and to be in the right place at the right time with the right guy and the right information and this, that, and then tie that in with trying to go home and be dad, you know, tie that in with leaving it at the doorstep, like we've talked before. Some people they never get it. They never can get it. It's just too tough to do. Some people get it in pieces, and depending on the type of job, they can take parts of it home. But it's a tough way to go, and it wears on the law enforcement community as a whole. You have to deal with that kind of thing all day. You know, your grandmother uh, asked me just last week, how in the world did you guys see all the negativity that you saw and all the horrible, horrendous, atrocious, all these type crimes, and then be able to walk into your house and let's go to Chuck E. Cheese? You know, I think I told her basically, um, you got to have faith in God because that's the only person that can keep you sane. You got to have good luck and you got to have a little bit of crazy. You got to be able to handle it. You got to jump into Chuck E. Cheese, get in the ball pit, whatever you got to do with your kids, and to bring it on home at the end of the day. So there's a little bit of everything. And if you lose a piece of it, it makes it tougher, that much more tougher. Unfortunately, a lot of people depend on other avenues to help them get through it. Temporary avenues, alcohol, tobacco, maybe even prescription drugs, other vices, to try to help them deal with the problem. And one day I hope we can look into some of that stuff, the post traumatic stress from it, different things of that nature.
Yeah.
But there's certainly a lot of things to be considered when you do something like that, and you can only be thankful when successes happen. You're a detective and you're 20 years in the job, and you don't go around eating you know pool chalk or sidewalk chalk, and you're not a nutball or something. So um, you can only celebrate those things. Those are great to do, and I think a lot of it too has to come with training. We're doing a lot of training right now, and we're doing a lot of awareness on mental health issues and trying to use different steps to prevent police shootings at traffic stops and different kinds of calls that normally you didn't see as often as you saw right now. And mental health being a big part of it. Well, it goes both ways. The law enforcement side needs to look at some of their mental health things and see if they can offer any assistance in that. So, kind of getting on a whole nother angle.
Yeah, that's
But
a whole nother episode in itself.
oh my gosh, I mean, and we need people far smarter than me to be talking about it.
Oh
I just
yeah, we'll get
I
somebody good to come talk about that one for sure.
know what I see.
Yeah, but a big burden and kind of a mental strain when it comes to confidential informants is that anything you have them do now, their life is on your hands.
Hmm.
When it was them just running the streets or doing whatever on their own, that's at their own will. But
Yeah.
when you're directing them and making the calls and you're backing them up or off to the side watching the whole thing go down while they're doing it, now it's like I have to make sure this guy's okay. I have to plan. I have to put all these procedures in place. Give them signs like, if you think things are going south, I need you to take your hat off and scratch your head with the bill. And it's got to be something that they can't, like, they won't do normally. Uh,
Right.
Maybe put both hands in your back pockets or whatever. Like I need to know if you feel like you're about to lose your life or something, and then we'll move in. So it's a as far as mental health and everything, like that can be a strain for sure.
You touched on something pretty cool. That whole business of, that's an informant that you've developed a relationship with who trusts you. Think about the lack of trust in law enforcement right now and how that must affect some people with their informants. Do they
Oh yeah,
really trust that law enforcement? We see press conferences where, especially after 9/11, and it's become pretty much a motto of every department. If you see something, say something. They're not going to say anything if they don't trust you. And
yeah,
right now, the trust level is pretty low. So we have to rebuild that part. The making cases the right way, having integrity. Don't fudge evidence. Don't create evidence. Don't plant evidence. Don't do things you shouldn't do.
yeah.
Um,
I can't endorse you to go commit crime. Only
no,
the crime that I'm directing you to do. Like if I'm sending you in to buy some drugs, you can't go in there and stab him because he talked to your girlfriend. Okay,
yeah,
like that's not how this works.
but they've got to trust the police, man. They have got to get that kind of level of trust between you and your informant. They have to keep their trust in the police. And every time a shooting happens where the officer didn't follow their policies and acted outside the rule of the law, that hurts every detective's ability to communicate with their own sources, because that source is going to think you're the police. There's no difference between you and that guy. And you have to rebuild that trust all over again. Now, some guys, as long as you're flashing enough green, they have all kinds of trust in you. But when you're working and you're in your infancy in your career and you're trying to build that rapport and trying to build that um, source value, it makes it tough when you have to start over again, when they don't have all that full trust in you and they don't understand what you're doing. So, um, lots of good things to talk about, lots of angles with informants and, you know, criminal, confidential, eyewitness. They're all valuable in solving a case. They're needed for a lot of cases.
Right.
Evidence alone doesn't always do it. You can have a trunk load of evidence, but if the person's never been in the DNA system, maybe they don't have fingerprints in the fingerprint system, you don't have anything but a bunch of evidence. And once you get that lead from the informant, once you get a suspect developed, your evidence has to support that. If your evidence doesn't support it, you're still nowhere. So it's a big job to try to make those connections and to put it together in a case that's prosecutable. So informants are a big part of it. And without them, we wouldn't, be able to solve as many cases as we do solve. Whether that's going to delay the case or speed it up, the one thing we talked about with getting back with victims and keeping them informed as to how your case is going, they don't necessarily, of course, they want to see it solved, but they'd rather see you at the front door talking to them and letting them know you're still engaged and that they're there because you're important. The victims are important. The victims' family are important. You go a long way toward building that trust and building community trust when you do that. I don't know a homicide detective anywhere that doesn't have at least 20 cases on his desk that are open, and that can make it tough to get back to people in time without them throwing a fit. Next thing you know, they're on the camera screaming, "Nobody will call me. Nobody will let me know what's going on." They haven't arrested anybody. So you got to build that trust, and it's hard, but that's what police work is. It's hard. It's hard to do what you need to do to fulfill your job the right way. So, um, yeah, they get on the TV and they're going to ask for public's help, see something, say something, and you just hope that you, as an agency, have been diligent in building that community trust so that you're not the one they're talking about when they get on there. It
Right.
just, it's key. It's key to getting it solved and to helping build that trust in the community. And I don't know. It's a good topic, man. Good
Yeah.
information.
Yeah. So I know one thing that was a little bit of sometimes it was a struggle, and then sometimes it just felt so good. Was cutting a source or
Hmm.
releasing a source or an informant, whether it's because they are leaving the area or things that are out of your control, like hey, the case is over, or they're they've done all that they can, and you just don't see how they could help anymore. Um, and then there's the ones that, they're jerking you around, they're not doing what they're supposed to. You give them tasks and they don't do it, and they're just, dirtbags. And then you get to cut them, not physically, obviously, but you release them from their duties. And some of my favorite ones are when you got someone and they're just jerking around, possibly even like double sided, like, hey, I'm working with the police, here's what
Yep.
they're having me do, and then they're sabotaging the whole thing. Well, then you
Yep.
go to wherever they're at when they're with their buddies or whatever. You walk right up to them and be like, hey, I just wanted to thank you for working with us and telling us about your friends and stuff, and hope
Oh,
you have a good day.
yeah. You just slammed the door on that one. I think I've always said informants have an expiration date
Yeah.
and they can't work forever. That somehow, some way, their date's going to come. But yeah, that's a good point. Working both sides, you have to watch out for that. That's why you can never trust them. And I mentioned that in the beginning. You cannot trust them no matter what. No matter what they tell you, what anybody tells you, you cannot trust them.
Yep,
And
because
you
they could
wouldn't
have
want
some hidden loyalties or something that you don't
to.
know
Exactly.
about, and all of a sudden now, like, the case is expanding to their friends, and they're like, oh, well, I just wanted to get this one person wrapped up, not
Yeah.
all my friends.
Yeah.
So, yep.
You can't. All right. Well, anyone has any questions, be sure and let us know. We just wanted to touch base on this, do a little flyover on it, kind of get some information about how some of that works and some insight because going forward, some of our cases will involve informants and information that we get from someone. And we hope that you enjoy it. We hope that the cases are interesting and generate some conversation.
Yep. Yep.
Thank you
And
for joining in.
yeah, and if you have like you said, if you have some questions or you want to inquire about possibly guest showing on the show or guest starring on the show, we actually have an email set up right now. It's just a temporary email that we have set up. It's called criminalmotive at gmail.com. And so you can send all your requests, all your questions, all whatever, complaints. If you want to complain about something, we may not read it, but we may not reply. We'll read it, but we may not reply.
Show up at your house.
Yeah. So send those to criminalmotive at gmail.com and we'll be happy to look those over. So again, we are glad you listened or watched, and we hope to see you on the next episode.
All right. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Another great case in the books. Be sure and tune in next week when we unpack a new one, and I hope you have a good week.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If you haven't already, go subscribe to our show. And if you liked it, maybe go get a buddy or two to go subscribe to it as well. Give us a like, a comment, a rating, whatever it is that you're watching this on, and make sure to give us some feedback because we want to make sure that we're doing the absolute best we can for our audience. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on Criminal Motives Behind the Crime Scene Tape.